militancy, extremism, violence, and intolerance have their roots deeply embedded in the systemic failure of the institutions and social and economic development policies. I would be speaking more on this point, but let me quickly run on these three first. The second reason is the emergence of the non-state groups, which, according to Bruce Rydell, he has described them as the force multiplier. That in itself tells you a little bit about it. These two developments, have caused this spiral process, which the chapter has traced as to how the spiral process have taken place, how it has increased, what is the nature of the cobweb paradigm which is there, and both of them collectively have strengthened the enemy syndrome. And ladies and gentlemen, seemingly this is what is now the guiding principle of all actions and responses from the two sides. The third is the transformation of the conflict from the low-level conflict from the low-level threat to the high-level threat. But I think it is equally important to understand its attribute, which I will be doing it in a short while. Going back to the first one, very briefly I will say, particularly when we are talking about the systematic failure of the institutions and the socio-economic development policies, I would like to point out to the systematic failure of the respective governments in strengthening institutions and creating employment, addressing the socio-economic disparity, ensuring equity, ensuring quality education and healthcare, and, very importantly, guaranteeing the rule of law. That has actually, you will see, it is all indicative as to how the decay has been caused. The failure is also, in some ways, very much evident in the trend seen in the increasing inflation, poverty, and the food security, where almost half of the population, that is approximately 48.6%, does not have an access to sufficient food, whereas 60% of the people live on less than $2 a day. The second thing, let me come down to the second point, that is the emergence of the non-state group. Looking at it, what I feel is, and I think it extensively looks into it, I think the emergence of the non-state group as a force multiplier has made conflict management more daunting, whereby to many terrorism in Pakistan is more a consequence of the foreign policy crisis, which can be largely characterized by the threat, leading to a situation where the United States is seen both as a partner and as an adversary, partner at the governmental level, but adversary at the societal level, while at the same time we have seen, and it is still very fresh in our memories, the emergence of the TTP and the role that they played in SWAT, where they made use of the violence and terror to force the government to comply with its demand. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these two phenomena have strengthened that spiral process of which I mentioned just a little while ago. The third thing, that is transformation of the conflict from the low level to the high level, I think it is extremely important and extremely interesting also it would be if we can try to look at the attributes of the crisis. What are the attributes of the crisis and what are the attributes of the system? In order to understand the transformation of the conflict from the low-level threat to the high-level threat, for example, the system attributes is indicative of the conditions in which the crisis unfolded itself in Pakistan. Some of the very relevant characteristics in the case of Pakistan are clearly the conflict environment, for example, unstable Afghanistan, and the so-called ongoing war on terror. Whereas the crisis attributes, again, of the crisis are extremely interesting, because somehow or the other, when you're tracing that, you see a number of the factors contributing, feeding into it. For example, the Bush Doctrine did contribute into it. Internally, when you look into it, it is the political and the economic instability which has feeded into it. For example, the dysfunctional democracy created that vacuum which feeded into the making of the problem. And if I can mention the non-integration of the population living in the farther areas along with the issues of the identities confronted by them. So I think these are some of the very clear but very precisely mentioned. I hope I did that very precisely, because condensing the whole chapter into 4 slides is difficult. But what I feel is there may be many other augmenting factors, but major factors have been mentioned, and what are its fallout for the making of the problem, which would be shared with you by Mr. Asif Iqbal, who is the senior principal economist over there. So over to you, Asif, before I pick up the later chapters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take you through the major findings of some of the chapters, mainly 5 chapters. One is on the impact of the war on Pakistan's economy. That includes the economic cost of war on terror, then fiscal impact, then progress on the social development indicators. The 4th one is the impact on the economy of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and 5th one is impact on the household welfare. But that's not the end of the story. After me again, Dr. Khalda will take it over and share the response from the civil society and the conclusions. You can have the slide. Okay, so the current situation can be characterized as a nexus between economic crisis, governance failure, and the security breakdown. She has talked about the security situation. Coming to the governance failure, according to worldwide governance indicators, Pakistan ranked below the South Asian average in most governance indicators in 2009. So not only Pakistan ranked below in 2009, but a trend analysis shows that many governance indicators have worsened since 2000. So over the decade, the situation has worsened. The other 3 points about the economy is the economic growth slowed down due to several factors, including the security situation. Of course, there were some other factors also, like the recession of global economy, oil price shocks, food price, and other stuff. But of course, the security situation has contributed also to the economic crisis. Then the economic cost of participating in the war on terror are rising exponentially. And the last point in this aspect, in this category, is that the economic cost is much higher than the assistance received, with all due respect to the Norris community present here. Next. So on the economy, can you go back? Yeah. So you can see, I wouldn't spend much time explaining the graph, but you can see that the GDP growth shows a pyramidal trend, increased till 2005-06 and then declined. Then you have investment as percentage of GDP, which increased till 2006-07, then declined. Then you have export as a percent of GDP declining and inflation rate increasing, and then we have fiscal deficit. So these are kind of challenges that the Pakistan's economy is currently facing. Next slide. Now coming to the economic cost of the war on terror. So basically, in 2009, the Institute of Public Policy has estimated the economic cost of terrorism for the year 2007 and 8, the first column that you see. So what we have then done is that using the same methodological framework, we have updated these costs for the year 2009-10. So one important point that you can see that the total cost has almost doubled, more than doubled. It increased from 380 billion rupees in 2008 to 841 billion in 2010. So that's alarming. But if you see the direct and indirect cost, in the direct cost we have higher cost of defense and police. Altogether in 2010 it's rupees 290 billion additional cost due to war on terror. Other costs include the cost of private security, damage to infrastructure and the property, and potential compensation to the victims. So altogether, the direct costs have increased from 149 to 320. Regarding indirect cost, Number one, if you see the cost to the local economy, which is basically economy of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, so the cost in 2010 had been estimated at rupees 130 billion, and you can see that it has more than threefold increase is there from 42 to 130. So then the other is the fall in private investment. The private investment as percentage of the GDP declined from 15.7% in 2006 to 10.7%, like 5 percentage point decline during the last 5 years. So the cost is estimated at 244 billion rupees. Then we have this fall in stock market capitalization, 123 billion. Other costs include the decline in travel and tourism industry and increase of rise in the insurance cost, etc. So altogether, you can see that the costs have more than doubled, almost doubled from 380 billion to 840. In dollars term, it has increased from $6 billion to 10 billion. And the last row, if you can see, is the ratio to cost to US bilateral assistance, that is 3 to 1. So the cost is 3 times higher than the bilateral assistance is received, what is received from the US. So coming to the fiscal impact. Next slide. So 3 majors visible in both defense and public safety, which is mainly police and other things. So defense you can see, but most importantly, if you see during the last 3 years, expenditure on security related things sectors have been increased dramatically, like from 340 billion to 612 in defense, and for public safety or police it's from 97 billion to 180. So there has been more than 20% growth during the last 3 years in security related expenditures. And the second point was reduction in the share of development expenditures. You can see from this graph that the share of development expenditure in total expenditure was 15% in 2001-2. It increased till 2005-6 and reached at 26%. Then after that, the share has declined and it declined to 21% of the total expenditure. Next. Coming to the current expenditure priorities, I have just focused on the provincial expenditures because primarily the responsibility of social service delivery lies with the provinces, but we have also done analysis regarding federal government expenditure, but that is given in the report, the detailed analysis. So what you see here, for all the provinces, public order and safety affairs, that is mainly police, the share, this is the share of expenditure, sectoral share. The share of public order and safety has increased in all the provinces, from in Punjab 10 to 15, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa from 7 to 19%. So, and affairs and the social services. Regarding economic affairs, almost in all the provinces, the share of economic affairs, that is like agriculture, irrigation, roads and transport, all these kind of departments, provincial departments. So the share of economic affairs improved 51%. So that's another important thing. So now coming to next. What has happened to the social development indicators during the last decade? Again, there are 3 points. One is that the reduced public spending on social services caused a slowdown in the pace of social development. In some indicators, we can see there is little improvement, but when you see the whole decade, the first part of the decade, you see the improvement. After that, the pace of the improvement is not that high as compared to the first part of the decade. The second is that most indicators of social development that I have covered. And the third point is that Pakistan is unlikely to meet most of the targets of MDGs. Coming to the trend in some key indicators of social, conservative or very careful estimate shows that poverty, the incidence of poverty is 38% in 2007-8, but after that it might have increased due to rising inflation and other factors. Regarding education and literacy, you can see a bit improvement, but the pace of improvement is lower in the later half, like 42 to 52 in the first 5 years, but then only 3 percentage point increase in the later 4 or 5 years. In primary completion rates, it has actually came down from 67% to 55%. Like the students who entered into the primary school but don't complete. So the gender parity index is the ratio of female to male enrollment. It has remained stagnant, 82, 85, 84. Similarly, secondary education improved from 2002 to 5, but then a bit declined. Youth literacy has improved a bit. Similarly, you can see the child health immunization. There is some positive indication in the incidence of diarrhea, which has the incidence has increased from declined from 14% to 10% during the last 4 or 5 years. Similarly, the LHV, which is lady health visitors, the coverage of LHV has also increased, but in other indicators there has not been much progress. So overall the situation is that in some indicators like poverty and education we don't see much improvement. Some indicators have worsened, but in some cases there has been improvement, but the pace of improvement or the development has slowed down after 2004 and 5. That's what the data shows. Next slide. Okay, now we come to the provincial economy of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. 4 major points I would like to share. One is that there has been substantial decline in agricultural sector growth. Number 2, there has been decline in the manufacturing sector growth. And number 3, there has been decline in the tax collection, which is kind of an indicator for the economic activity, progress in the economic activity in the formal sector. So if the collection is youth unemployment is high. Okay. On the agricultural sector, the first column gives you the share of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in the total production of crops in Pakistan. So tobacco, maize, barley, you can see. But within the province, there are 3, in terms of acreage, there are 3 major crops, which is maize, sugarcane and wheat. And you can see that the growth, the second column is the growth from 2001 to 5, and the last column is growth from 5 to 9. So you can see that growth in almost all crops have declined substantially. Like if you see the major crops, maize was already negative, minus 1.1. Now it has come down to minus 8%. Similarly, the sugar cane to minus 4.6. Wheat from 6.8 to 1.1. So it shows that the overall the growth of agricultural sector in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has declined very significantly. Of course, the decline could be there in the rest of the country, but you'll see in the report, I've not shown here, but you'll see in the report that the decline in the growth in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is much higher than the national average. That is there in the report. Okay, manufacturing sector, you can see some important sectors of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa economy: cigarettes, cooking oil, ghee, beverages, sugar, textile. Except for cigarettes, people are smoking in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa a lot. So it has increased from minus 2% to 11%, but in other sectors, cooking oil, ghee, sugar beverage, sugar and even cotton, all have declined very, very significantly. In terms of collection of taxes, you can see the share in total collection of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa from 2001 to, there are 2 columns. One is, 3 columns. For example, federal excise declined, share of total collection